If you ask military historians to name the greatest American fighter pilots of the Second World War, you'll hear familiar names. Some will mention Richard Bong, America's highest-scoring ace. Others will point to Chuck Yeager, who would later become the first man to break the sound barrier. Many will remember the fearless pilots who escorted bombers deep into Nazi Germany during the final years of the war. But there is one name that deserves far more recognition than it usually receives. A man who, during one of the most dangerous air battles of the European campaign, found himself facing enemy fighters with an impossible problem. His guns had fallen silent. Every round of ammunition had been fired. Most pilots would have done the logical thing. Turn home, save the airplane, live to fight another day. Instead, he pushed the throttle forward, flew directly toward the enemy, and somehow convinced experienced German fighter pilots that he was still capable of shooting them down. His name was James H. Howard, and his courage would earn him America's highest military decoration. To understand how such an unbelievable moment became possible, we first have to understand the man himself. James Howell Howard was born in 1913, years before the world would be consumed by global war. Like many boys growing up during the early 20th century, he became fascinated by machines, automobiles, engines, and above all, airplanes. Flight still seemed almost magical during his childhood. The Wright brothers had achieved powered flight only a decade before his birth. Every new aircraft represented another step into an uncertain future. Young Howard followed aviation developments with enormous interest. Unlike many children who dreamed about flying, he possessed something equally important: determination. He worked hard, learned quickly, and steadily developed the discipline that would later define his military career. By the late 1930s, as tensions increased across Europe and Asia, Howard entered military aviation. He trained as a fighter pilot during an era when aviation technology evolved at breathtaking speed. Aircraft became faster every year, more powerful, more heavily armed. Pilots constantly adapted to new machines and new tactics. Flying demanded complete concentration. Unlike modern aircraft equipped with sophisticated electronics, fighters of the era depended almost entirely upon the pilot's skill. There were no computers correcting mistakes, no guided missiles. Every victory depended upon eyesight, judgment, reflexes, and nerves of steel. When the United States remained officially neutral during the early years of World War II, many American pilots searched for ways to contribute without directly involving their own country. One opportunity appeared in China. There, American volunteers secretly joined a remarkable organization officially known as the First American Volunteer Group. History remembers them simply as the Flying Tigers. Operating under the command of Claire Lee Chennault, these volunteer pilots flew against Japanese forces long before America formally entered the war. Howard became one of them. Flying the famous Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, decorated with its iconic shark-mouth nose art, he quickly proved himself an exceptional combat pilot. The skies over China offered no mercy. Japanese fighter pilots possessed years of combat experience. Many had already fought across Asia before encountering the Flying Tigers. Every mission demanded careful planning. The P-40 lacked some of the performance advantages enjoyed by Japanese fighters. Instead of relying on tight-turning battles, Chennault taught his pilots to exploit speed, surprise, and diving attacks. Howard mastered those tactics brilliantly. Rather than engaging in prolonged turning contests, he struck hard, then climbed away before the enemy could respond. The strategy worked. Mission after mission, he demonstrated remarkable calm under pressure. He learned perhaps the most valuable lesson any fighter pilot could possess: patience. The best opportunities often belong to the pilot willing to wait for exactly the right moment. Howard's success with the Flying Tigers transformed him into one of America's most experienced fighter pilots before the United States had even fully entered the war. After attack on Pearl Harbor, America's role changed completely. The nation was now fully committed to global war. Experienced combat pilots suddenly became incredibly valuable. Howard transferred into the United States Army Air Forces, bringing with him experience few American pilots could match. By 1943, the focus of the air war had shifted dramatically. American heavy bombers crossed the English Channel almost daily. Their mission was simple in theory: destroy Germany's factories, oil refineries, aircraft production, transportation networks, reduce Nazi Germany's ability to wage war. The reality proved far more dangerous. Every bombing mission triggered fierce resistance. German radar detected incoming formations long before they reached their targets. Soon afterward, experienced Luftwaffe fighter pilots climbed into the air. Their objective was brutally straightforward: destroy as many American bombers as possible before they reached Germany. The bombers themselves carried defensive machine guns, dozens of them, but no bomber formation could survive indefinitely against determined fighter attacks without escort. That responsibility fell upon aircraft like Howard's new fighter, the legendary North American P-51 Mustang. The Mustang changed everything. Unlike earlier American fighters, it possessed the range necessary to accompany bombers all the way to Germany and back. German pilots could no longer simply wait until escorts turned home because of limited fuel. Now, American fighters remained beside the bombers almost the entire journey. Escort duty demanded extraordinary discipline. Every pilot understood his primary responsibility: protect the bombers. Do not chase every enemy fighter. Stay with the formation. Because once bombers lost fighter cover, casualties could become catastrophic. Howard embraced that responsibility completely. His reputation among fellow pilots continued growing. He remained calm, professional, aggressive when necessary, yet never reckless. Those qualities made him an ideal escort commander. By January 1944, the strategic air campaign over Europe had reached unprecedented intensity. American bombers flew increasingly deeper into German territory. The Luftwaffe responded with massive interceptions. Entire skies became battlefields stretching for miles. Hundreds of aircraft sometimes fought simultaneously. Survival depended upon teamwork. Then came January 11, 1944, a date that would permanently enter aviation history. That morning, hundreds of American bombers departed England bound for targets inside Germany. Escort fighters climbed alongside them. Among those escort pilots flew Major James Howard. The weather remained reasonably clear. Visibility was good. Everything appeared routine, until radio reports suddenly warned of approaching German fighters. Not just a few aircraft, dozens, perhaps more. Experienced Luftwaffe units had assembled specifically to intercept the incoming bomber stream. Within minutes, the peaceful winter sky exploded into violence. Contrails twisted across the heavens. Machine guns opened fire. Cannons flashed. Fighters dived through bomber formations from every direction. And before the battle finally ended, James Howard would find himself completely alone, surrounded by enemy aircraft, with every single bullet already fired. The first warning came over the radio: bandits approaching. Every escort pilot immediately understood what that meant. Somewhere ahead, the Luftwaffe had assembled another interception force. For the crews aboard the American bombers, it was the moment they dreaded on every mission. The bombers were powerful aircraft. Each Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress carried multiple 50 caliber machine guns capable of filling the sky with defensive fire. But there was a limit to what even the Flying Fortress could endure. German fighter pilots had developed increasingly sophisticated attack tactics. Instead of making random passes, they coordinated assaults from multiple directions. Some attacked head-on, where the bombers' closing speed made accurate defensive fire incredibly difficult. Others struck from above. Others dived through the formation before climbing away to attack again. The escort fighters existed for one purpose: stop those attacks before the bombers were overwhelmed. Major James H. Howard pushed his North American P-51 Mustang forward. Ahead of him, dozens of German fighters appeared against the pale winter sky. The Luftwaffe had committed some of its best pilots. Among them were experienced veterans flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190. Many had survived years of combat on multiple fronts. They knew exactly how to break apart bomber formations. The sky exploded into motion. American fighters dived toward the attackers. German aircraft scattered before reforming into smaller groups. Contrails twisted in every direction. Machine guns flashed. Cannons thundered. Pilots screamed warnings over the radio faster than anyone could fully understand. Within seconds, what had begun as an organized escort mission dissolved into dozens of separate dogfights stretching across miles of sky. Howard concentrated on one thing: the bombers. Every decision he made revolved around keeping enemy fighters away from them. He ignored tempting opportunities to chase damaged German aircraft. Destroying fighters meant little if the bombers behind him were left defenseless. Instead, he attacked every German airplane threatening the formation. His Mustang plunged through the enemy at tremendous speed. 6.50 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. Bright streams of tracer rounds reached toward a German fighter preparing to attack a B-17. The German pilot broke away immediately. Howard climbed sharply, rolled over, selected another target. Again, his guns fired. Again, another attack on the bombers collapsed. For several minutes, the battle followed a brutal rhythm. Attack. Climb. Turn. Fire. Repeat. Each firing pass consumed precious ammunition. Every burst lasted only a second or two. Experienced fighter pilots never held the trigger down continuously. Doing so wasted ammunition and overheated weapons. Howard fired only when he believed he had a genuine chance of hitting. Even so, the ammunition supply inside a fighter aircraft was finite. Unlike bombers carrying enormous payloads, fighters could only carry so much weight. Every second the guns fired brought him closer to empty magazines. The battle intensified. German fighters continued arriving in waves. American escorts became increasingly scattered while pursuing different attacks. Radio communications grew confused. Some aircraft reported damage. Others requested assistance. Smoke trails appeared throughout the sky. Bombers struggled to maintain formation despite repeated assaults. Then Howard noticed something alarming. A group of B-17s had drifted away from the main formation. Whether through combat damage, navigation difficulties, or simple confusion, they had become isolated. Separated bombers were exactly what German fighter pilots hoped to find. Without concentrated defensive fire from the larger formation, they became far easier targets. Howard looked around. Where were the other escorts? Some had chased enemy fighters. Others had become involved in their own dogfights. Several had disappeared into distant clouds, for reasons no one completely understood during the battle. Howard suddenly found himself as the only American fighter still close enough to defend the isolated bombers. The odds were staggering. One Mustang, several heavy bombers, dozens of German fighters. Most pilots would have called for help while remaining cautious. Howard didn't have that luxury. Help was too far away. The bombers needed protection immediately. Without hesitation, he accelerated directly toward the nearest German formation. The Luftwaffe pilots seemed surprised. Instead of fleeing or remaining defensive, the lone Mustang charged straight into them. Howard opened fire. One German fighter immediately abandoned its attack. He swung toward another. More gunfire. Another German aircraft pulled away. Again and again, Howard forced enemy fighters to break off their bombing runs. The German pilots suddenly faced an aggressive escort who seemed to appear everywhere at once. He attacked from above, from behind, from unexpected angles, rarely giving them enough time to concentrate on the bombers. Minutes passed. The battle showed no sign of ending. Howard continued firing carefully. Short bursts. Precise bursts. No wasted ammunition. Yet every squeeze of the trigger reduced what remained inside his wings. Then, it happened. Howard pressed the firing button once more. Nothing. No thunder from the 6 Browning machine guns. No tracers. No recoil. Only silence. His ammunition was gone. Completely gone. He checked again. Still nothing. The realization struck instantly. He was now flying an unarmed fighter deep inside enemy airspace. Surrounded by experienced German pilots, conventional military logic offered only one reasonable option: disengage. Turn west. Return toward England while the aircraft was still intact. No one would have questioned that decision. He had already done more than anyone could reasonably expect. But Howard looked toward the isolated bombers. German fighters still circled them. If he left now, those bomber crews would almost certainly face devastating attacks. 10 men served aboard each B-17. One bomber represented 10 American lives. Several bombers, dozens of lives. Howard later admitted that he barely paused to think. Instinct made the decision before logic could intervene. If his guns no longer worked, he would simply have to convince the enemy they did. He shoved the throttle fully forward. The Merlin engine roared. The Mustang accelerated once again toward the German fighters. At first, nothing appeared unusual. The Luftwaffe pilots saw the same American fighter returning for another attack. Naturally, they broke formation to avoid his firing pass. Howard smiled to himself. They didn't know. How could they? No pilot could instantly determine whether another aircraft had ammunition remaining. The Germans assumed exactly what any experienced pilot would assume. If the Mustang was attacking, it must still be armed. Howard rolled sharply behind another German fighter. He closed rapidly, exactly as though preparing to fire. The German pilot reacted immediately. He broke violently away, abandoning yet another attack on the bombers. Howard had accomplished exactly what he wanted. Without firing a single bullet, he had saved another bomber. For the next several astonishing minutes, he repeated the deception over and over. Every pass looked completely authentic. Every maneuver suggested an imminent burst of machine gun fire. The German pilots responded instinctively. No experienced aviator wanted to remain directly in front of an attacking P-51. Again and again, they scattered. Again and again, bombing attacks dissolved before reaching the American formation. Howard had transformed his empty fighter into a psychological weapon. But sooner or later, someone on the German side would realize the truth. And when that happened, the lone American pilot would have no way to defend himself. High above Germany, the battle had reached its most dangerous moment. Major James H. Howard was flying an aircraft that looked every bit as deadly as it had a few minutes earlier. His sleek North American P-51 Mustang still carried the unmistakable shape of one of the finest fighters of the Second World War. Its powerful Merlin engine continued pulling it through the winter sky at incredible speed. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside the wings, however, every ammunition box was empty. The 6 Browning .50 caliber machine guns that had protected the bomber formation moments before were now completely silent. Howard had become one of the few fighter pilots in history to continue a dogfight after exhausting every round he carried. Most air battles lasted only a few minutes. Pilots attacked, separated, reformed, or disengaged. But this engagement seemed determined to continue. German fighters still circled the isolated American bombers, searching for another opportunity to strike. Howard knew he had only one advantage left. The enemy didn't know he was defenseless. As long as they believed his guns still worked, he could still influence the battle. So he continued flying exactly as though nothing had happened. He accelerated toward another Messerschmitt Bf-109 lining up behind a B-17. Closing rapidly from above, Howard positioned his Mustang exactly where an experienced fighter pilot would normally fire. The German pilot glanced backward. He saw the American fighter closing fast. Without hesitation, he abandoned his attack and rolled away into a steep dive. Howard smiled. Another bomber had been spared. No bullets. No explosions. Just nerve. Seconds later, another German fighter approached the formation from a different direction. Howard immediately reversed course. Again, he charged directly toward the attacker. Again, the German pilot reacted instinctively, breaking away before reaching firing range. The deception continued working. Experienced fighter pilots survived because they respected danger. When another aircraft appeared in an ideal firing position, hesitation could be fatal. The Luftwaffe pilots had no reason to assume the American had exhausted his ammunition. From their perspective, they were facing an aggressive escort pilot attacking with extraordinary confidence. And confidence itself became a weapon. Several bomber crews watched the incredible spectacle unfold. At first, they assumed Howard was still firing. Only later did they realize something remarkable. No muzzle flashes. No tracers. No smoke from the Mustang's wings. Yet German fighters continued avoiding him. The American pilot wasn't shooting them. He was intimidating them. Again and again, Howard placed his aircraft between the bombers and the enemy. He dived, climbed, rolled, made aggressive firing passes. Every maneuver forced German pilots to react. Each reaction bought the bombers another few precious seconds. Inside the B-17s, the crews understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. 10 men served aboard every bomber. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, flight engineer, several gunners. Every successful interruption of a German attack increased all 10 men's chances of returning home. Years later, surviving bomber crew members still remembered the sight of a lone Mustang repeatedly charging entire groups of enemy fighters. One gunner later recalled that it seemed as though Howard was everywhere at once. Whenever German fighters prepared another coordinated attack, there he was, diving through the formation, breaking their concentration, forcing them to scatter. Historians would later describe the engagement as one of the finest examples of aggressive fighter escort tactics during the European Air War. Not because Howard shot down an extraordinary number of aircraft that day, but because he accomplished something arguably even more valuable. He prevented the Luftwaffe from destroying the bombers assigned to his protection. Eventually, additional American escort fighters began returning to the area. German pilots, having already spent considerable time fighting both the bombers and Howard's relentless attacks, gradually withdrew. Fuel was limited. Ammunition was running low on both sides. The battle slowly drifted apart across the winter sky. Howard finally turned his Mustang toward England. Only then did the enormous emotional weight of what had happened begin to settle in. His hands, steady throughout the engagement, now felt exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight slowly faded. The radio remained unusually quiet. Many pilots simply didn't yet understand exactly what they had witnessed. After landing safely, Howard climbed from his aircraft. Ground crews immediately approached to inspect the Mustang. One mechanic examined the empty ammunition bays. Another looked for combat damage. Pilots from neighboring squadrons began asking questions. "How many rounds do you have left?" Howard simply smiled. "None." At first, many assumed he was joking. Then the armorers confirmed it. Every ammunition belt had been completely expended during the battle, yet Howard had remained over enemy territory for several additional minutes, repeatedly engaging German fighters with nothing more than the appearance of being armed. The bomber crews soon began arriving back from the mission. Their stories all pointed toward the same conclusion. One fighter pilot had stayed with them when almost everyone else had become separated by the chaos of combat. One fighter pilot had repeatedly driven away attacking German aircraft. One fighter pilot had refused to abandon them despite overwhelming odds. The reports climbed steadily through the chain of command. Wing commanders interviewed witnesses. Bomber crews compared accounts. Escort pilots added their observations. The evidence became overwhelming. James Howard had displayed a level of courage, discipline, and selfless determination almost impossible to exaggerate. Unlike many famous wartime stories, there was no dramatic last-second explosion, no miraculous secret weapon, no unbelievable stroke of luck. Howard's victory came from something much simpler. He understood the psychology of aerial combat. He knew that fighter pilots made split-second decisions based on perceived threats. By flying aggressively and refusing to show hesitation, he convinced experienced German aviators that attacking the bombers was simply too dangerous. His confidence became stronger than bullets. Several months later, the United States formally recognized what had happened on that January mission. James H. Howard received the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for valor. The citation praised not only his skill as a pilot, but his extraordinary devotion to protecting the bomber crews despite overwhelming danger. He became the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive the Medal of Honor for aerial action during World War II. It was a remarkable distinction. Yet those who knew Howard best often remarked that he remained surprisingly humble. He never claimed to be fearless. He never portrayed himself as larger than life. Like many veterans of his generation, he simply believed he had done the job expected of him. The bomber crews whose lives he helped save felt differently. For them, Howard represented the very best qualities of the American fighting man: professional, calm, selfless, completely committed to his mission. After the war, aviation technology changed dramatically. Jet fighters replaced propeller-driven aircraft. Guided missiles eventually replaced close-range machine gun dogfights. Modern pilots fight in a world almost unimaginable to the young men who flew over Europe in 1944. But one lesson from James Howard's story has never become outdated. Technology matters. Training matters. Weapons matter. Yet in the decisive moments, character matters most. Anyone can press a trigger while ammunition remains. Very few people continue advancing after the trigger produces only silence. That winter day over Germany, James Howard proved that courage is not measured by the number of bullets a man carries. It is measured by what he chooses to do after the last one has been fired. The bomber crews eventually returned home. Many raised families, built careers, lived long lives after the war ended. Some of those lives existed because one American fighter pilot refused to turn away when every practical reason told him he should. His guns were empty. His fuel was steadily disappearing. The odds were hopeless. But his sense of duty remained full. And sometimes, that is the most powerful weapon a soldier can ever carry.